all through till now. The port productivity, of course, the issues, cost savings due to economies of scale. So what are we doing for all these things? And in Indian context, two or three things that I would also like to highlight. When we say mega ports, of course, the mega port that we are looking at is the Vadhavan port that JNPA has been given the responsibility for. It's going to be about 24 million TEUs, which is 2.5 times of, or almost 3 times of what JNPA is. So it is going to be, because it has a natural draft of more than 18. So it is expected to be that mega port that is future ready, what we are discussing as future. The second part, I would still think for the whole country, is that we don't still realize that our level of containerization in the country still is very low. Even the developing countries do about 60 to 65%. The developed countries do about 80%. We are roughly 35%. I think some of the newer private ports are looking at a lot of containerization. Right now, JNPA in government and Mundra in the private sector together contribute or look after more than 60 to 65% of the containerization of the country. So that is the other part that is going to come in. The third part, which was specifically mentioned here, was the landlord model. The landlord model is in terms of understanding how the ports are run. That's more for government ports. World over, even in China, because most of the ports are owned by the municipal governments. So they are landlord in the sense that municipal governments own, but mostly the operators are somebody else, so to say. So here the landlord model, JNP is the first one now to have, I mean, after signing the current concession agreements we've just signed for our own terminal, for the 2 other berths that we were running, we become the 100% landlord model. There may not be 100% in all the ports, because obviously it may not work for either the private operator or for the government port to run that model. But the learnings are that if you have to leverage the position of the private sector in terms of getting the shipping lines, all these, some of the operators, let's say APM terminals, Girish is sitting here, or the other big names, they run as many as 60 to 70 terminals all over the world. So when a government entity here is running just 1 or 2 with all the inefficiencies of the public sector, it no longer makes sense to carry on with the same system. It makes a lot of sense to get into the public-private partnership that is being talked about. During the course of discussion, since we have gone through this whole exercise at JNPA, I'll come into those issues. But I think let's start discussing with the panelists so that it becomes a little bit of a panel discussion rather than just delivering our lectures. So can I get Girish in then? On this issue, plus what you think is future, because I've deliberately not touched on the smart part, the sustainable part, and all this, where you can talk about. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. So as you rightly alluded, sir, for me there are 3 key themes that will emerge from a future of ports perspective. One is infrastructure. Like you rightly said, we will get into mega ports in the country. Currently our largest ports handle about 7 to 8 million, 9 million TEUs. Individual terminals within these ports can handle up to 2 million TEUs. That will definitely change to each terminal, handling up to 10 million TEUs. So that's the kind of infrastructure that will be built. And then certainly the drafts will be 18 to 20 meters to handle large vessels, the 18,000 to 20,000 to 22,000 TEU vessels, which certainly will, I believe, come to India as we keep moving forward. The EXIM trade will continue to grow as we grow in our economy. We are a $3 trillion economy. Believe we will be 5 trillion in 3 to 4 years' time, and then marching towards the $10 trillion economy. So clearly, as a trend, infrastructure, large infrastructure in the port sector is something that definitely will be seen in India. The second theme that I think, that I believe will happen in India in the ports of India would be digitization and data. And when I say digitization, this already started to happen, but everything potentially can be digitized. Starting with assets, ports deploy large, expensive assets to handle those ports, to manage those ports. All of these assets will get digitalized, which really means that you would be able to understand the performance of the port sitting in a cabin. You don't need to run around to figure out how individual assets are performing, how processes are performing. That is something that you will know, and you will use digitalizations to significantly improve those processes digitally. What will also mean is that you'll get into predictive analytics. What will happen is it'll tell you what's the real potential problem that can happen to an asset. You can fix that problem far more earlier, and hence you'll move to predictive maintenance from corrective maintenance today. That really means that the productivity will go up, the cost of operations will go down, and that can be passed on to the customers. So just as an example. The second example that I can think is gates. The gates will be completely automated. There'll be, what I believe will be truck appointment system, which essentially means that we will not see queues at our gate. These will be extremely efficient gates, and hence it will improve productivity for our trade partners and help in reducing their cost and efficiencies. Similarly, there are many opportunities from a data perspective. Just as an example, DLDS today actually runs connecting all our containers. Each container has an RFID, or almost each containers have RFID. That data can be used to predictively analyze and understand how the container movements will happen in the port, outside of the port, in the city limits, outside of the city limits, which will certainly help us to plan our resources better within the ports, outside of the port. So for example, within the ports, I can predict as I move forward what the kind of resources I need on a Sunday vis-a-vis a Friday, just as a case in point, based on predictive analytics. Similarly, the city police can predict where will be the traffic of these containers in, let's say, Thane district at any point in time, and hence they can plan significantly better. So predictive analytics to manage our ports as well as our city limits will be order of the day. The third theme for me is going to be decarbonization. Each and every port, as I see in India, will significantly reduce their net carbon emissions over the next 3 to 5 years. We believe we can go down by 50% to start with, using many opportunities that we have, reducing our consumption of energy, using smart meters, using solar energy, so on and so forth. So there's a huge opportunity to be tapped within the ports of the country, and I think these three key themes will play out as we move in the future.
While most of these are discussed and we all agree, as I mentioned in the beginning, don't you think some of these sustainability measures would conflict with the productivity measures that we're looking at? And how would you like to minimize the conflict?
So I think you're right, sir. So one of the conflicts that we potentially see is moving smart, and which could potentially have a conflict on productivity. But when I look at increasing the infrastructure, or building a large infrastructure, that will actually help in generating more productivity. Most of the technology automation is focused on improving our productivity to ensure that we give back to our customers far more. However, on the decarb side, yes, initially it potentially can slow us down. There are regulatory challenges, et cetera. But I think once we start to push the boundaries, my view is that hurdle will also be crossed as we move forward.
Okay, maybe I'll come back to you later on this point. We go to Sanjam. But why don't you tell us what is the future of the shipping industry? What would be those 3 or 4 big points,
Sure.
or the big verticals that we would be looking at?
Sure. So one is, of course, starting with the changing technologies that are taking place. And, if you go to Silicon Valley today, you find that everyone's talking about transport, and there's a growing recognition that we're at the beginning of a revolutionary era. We're already seeing the IMO talking about unmanned vessels. And that means that this technology offers a huge promise because 90% of accidents that take place at sea happen due to human error. So there could be a huge safety benefit to keep seafarers off the riskiest routes. There are drones in the skies that could be used to over our seas inspecting ships, further improving safety. And there's a huge efficiency boost that could make maritime even more competitive against road freight, which in turn offers huge environmental benefits. But now this is concern that the effect automation will have on jobs. And these concerns, while we should take them seriously, there's also evidence that automation will create wealth, and wealth will create further opportunity, and opportunity will create new jobs. So the seafarer of today could be the unmanned vessel operator of tomorrow, or he or she could help design intelligent software. And all these require different skills, and that's why the industry needs to keep in touch with its changing workforce, and that's why maritime training and education is really, really critical and important. But one of the points that was discussed today, you know, there was a 4-point agenda, and somebody added a 5th point and a 6th point, and I want to add my 7th and say that in the industry makeup is today male-dominated, and the ITF estimates that 98% of the maritime workforce is male. We did an Indian study to find out there's only 4% of female CEO. Now, this isn't a challenge unique to the maritime industry, but that's the point. We really need to change, and we keep talking about India being a maritime superpower and we needing to excel, but you can't do that unless you have the best talent, and you can't have the best talent if you're going to exclude women who are 50% of your workforce. So I think that's a very, very important point. Also to be kept in mind with, which is one of the UN Sustainable Development Goals. So what's preventing gender equality in the maritime sector is that women are not suitable for these roles, and I think that comes with, there has to be a mindset change for that. But for that, we also need to make sure that we have more women entering the industry. So maritime training and education is important. We found that in COVID, virtual education became so much more important. So that's the very important, one of the important elements, I think, because we hear today about the blue economy and it's going to create a lot of jobs. But how is it going to do that? Unless we're going to have a trained workforce, we're not going to be able to create more jobs. Yeah, and finally, coming with changing technologies come with its security threats. So I think that, you know, cyber security is a huge concern. The more we, you know, revolutionize, we turn to digitization. There's also the threat of maritime security, whether it's to do with piracy or even threats where, you know, entire ports have come to a standstill because of a cyber attack. So I think those things need to be kept in mind.
Okay, I think some of these issues can be discussed further apart from the smart, sustainable, the mega ports. We've added the women leadership piece as per Sanjam. So that is something which the future must expect. Let's say that we'll have much more or much better representation of women, not just in leadership positions, but in the sector as a whole. I think we can have a second round of questions, but let me get in the other two speakers first. We have Mr. Tripathi, is that right? That's right. Yeah. Subrat Tripathi, yeah. So, of course, I think from you, the one part we would like to obviously hear is about the emerging role of the private sector in this field, and how has been the experience so far, and what are those challenges that you have faced?
Well, thank you, Chairman and co-panelists, and for Bharat Pravah to give this opportunity. First of all, I come from a very, you know, I take this in the drift of the conversation since morning and at the moment. The PPP has come to mature in India as far as the port sector is concerned, and JNPT, which you are leading so wonderfully, is a very good example of how the landlord model has evolved. But I will take a slight deviation to say that while the PPP has matured and the need of the country is certainly about it, Two things that disturb my mind. One is India's capability, desire to come into the world stage, recreate the sense of economic importance that we once had, and that cannot happen, I repeat, cannot happen, that merely having manufacturing industrialization, but also becoming an integral part of the world trade. This is to say that world trade is now, there's a sense of borderlessness in the world today, and that emerges from the fact that more than the events of globalization, and now with the digitalization having superseded, and you mentioned about the consolidation of shipping lines, and the fact that you sit in Amsterdam or you sit in Timbuktu, and you can deliver goods anywhere across the world through one bill of lading, the world has dramatically changed. Now, what disturbs me is that in this scope, India's share in the world trade, it's improving certainly, but it's a meager less than 2%. And the fact that the balance of trade is more heavily towards import, and of course that explains as to why we have an energy requirement, and that gives a tremendous opportunity for an energy transition that I am personally witnessing, and I'm very happy to see that. The second is the LPI index, which has somehow has been kind of an elephant in the room, which Government of India speaks of very largely, is that where does India stand on the logistics performance index? We stand a mere very poor 44th, and two important reasons that have been identified for that. One, the absence of appropriate infrastructure to handle, and I get back to what Mr. Girish mentioned about the point. And the second is about procedural reforms. I'll take one at a time. Absence of infrastructure, and that, Sanjay ji, to just tell you what has been my journey. Personally, a journey of, I'm a believer that the distinction between the government and the private sector is a very artificial distinction. If anything, it is a lag factor in the government. There's nothing, I mean, you are the best example of how the thrift of the private sector, the efficiency of the private sector, under regulatory umbrella of a very benign government structure can lead to sense, very proudly we saying that today, between JNPT and between Mundra, and between some of the terminals in Chennai, and of course the terminal that Mr. Girish runs, we have some of the best ports in the world. Our GCRs, our crane rates, our productivity, not to mention the world's largest vessels. I don't know why we are so fascinated about size. It's about efficiency. Incidentally, Raffles, which visited Mundra at 400 LOA and 24,000 capability, it's not about that. It is improving the index and making India relevant. In that context, has the PPP underscored the point? It has. Does it need to travel further? It needs to. What does it need to do? To foster an investment cycle into the entire sector, we must come out of a 30-year concession period. I'm happy to and delighted to note that the latest MCA guidelines talk about a right of first refusal after 30 years, but please understand that for a terminal which is intensive in capital, you need a certain amount of equity as well as a certain amount of loan structure to build a capital, infuse capital to build a modern terminal. It doesn't come easy. And you have to compete, our capability of building best cranes in the world is still limited. When you do that, look for larger concession periods. And to that extent, I'm very glad to mention that a little bit of policy advocacy with some of the state governments, such as West Bengal, where we have won a tender to build a port at Tajpur, is on a 99-year concession period. I think that is path-breaking to see that a long concession period gives a gestation for a larger capital cycle, which then fosters larger economic development. How has been the journey between the private and the government? The private and the government need to merge, and therefore, the procedural reform that I'm talking about, and there it has been identified about large-scale reforms in the customs and in the way we digitalize and conduct our cargo movements. I, for one, have been at the receiving end of seeing that whether a container carries a certain amount of goods or not. And we've all been, at the receiving end to say that, contraband goods, etc., come to a port willingly. There cannot be something more farther from truth about it. So therefore, we have a votary to say, today, technology enables you to have 100% scanning at all our ports. Now, technology, I repeat, is not a lag on the efficiency. If today, if you look at a simple equation between RTG and an RMG means, and if you're automating an RMG, and Mr. Girish, you will bear me out, it will not lead to a lag. It hasn't led to a lag in the best terminals in Port Klang, in Singapore, in Jebel Ali. It will not lead to a lag in India as well. And that's where we are transiting. If you want to be competent, if you want to compete, and if you want to be relevant, we have to have the best in the world. So I come back to the concession period, and also a fostering climate to give a certain amount of private investment into that. We well recognize that private investment is a very important part of development, and I myself leading some of these initiatives, very happy to do that. We need a performance index which is reasonable, which is kind of accommodates as to what can be a force majeure, genuine force majeure. What would you tell if COVID happens and the world comes to a stop? Will you hold it against an operator that you have not performed? So you need a more reasonable and a more understanding climate for business. So if there is an ease of doing business, the twin pillars on which I would stand, good infrastructure, an enabling environment through a regulatory framework, and an understanding, capable administration which is aware of the difficulties and comes to that. My last point, which is very important and I feel, is that all the ports and the necessity for India to recreate its manufacturing regions along with the ports. For long, we have been taking manufacturing regions well into the hinterland. While there can be economic debate on how a balanced development does occur, you must be aware that much of our lands near the seas are somewhat which needs a little bit of reclamation, which can be rehabilitated. If you wish to seek for examples, you don't have to go far. The entire Singapore, which stands at the crossroads of East and West trade, is entirely from reclaimed land. You come to the Middle East today, Jebel Ali terminals. If you go to see the palm resorts in Dubai, all of them are reclaimed lands. So when the pressure of land is there, if you reclaim and create coastal economic zones, and you have a more kind of an accommodative CRZ rules in this country, then you create a coastal economic zone, and ports need to mature, not merely as ports anymore. Incidentally, we don't look ourselves as a port operator anymore. We look ourselves as cargo aggregators or as a transport utility service. So I keep saying in a very Socratean kind of thing, the whole is different from the sum of its parts, which means we are a port operator and beyond it. We are a train operator and beyond it. We are a terminal operator and beyond it. We are an ICT operator and beyond it. It is the ability to integrate and therefore have a composite value for the customer, delivering at first and last mile services. These are some of the important things that immediately come to my mind. Fair enough, when we go ahead, we can do a little bit of more discussion. The last point on RE that I want to tell you, renewable energy has to be embraced as digitalization has too. When I talked about the integration cannot happen without a platform of digitalization. So today, the Amazons of the world, whether we want them or not, all of us have a certain kind of, if you wish to buy something today, your first reaction would, can Amazon deliver to me? Can Swiggy deliver to me? What has it done basically? It has aggregated a huge mass of unaggregators and brought a service to your table. That's what the transport sector needs to evolve into. And how does sustainability and RE come into that? I'm very delighted, Chairman Sir, to apprise you that we have in the APSs taken a mission that by 2025, we would become carbon neutral, and by 2030, net zero. And this is in part of the larger aspirations that we have given. And you'll be aware that we are rated not just by Indian agencies, but by the best agencies in the world, because we have to draw capital from around the world. So you cannot but not pass the test. So while we do so, a very small thing that I wish to update, we very recently have got placed an order for transforming each of our ITVs from a diesel energy mode into electric ITVs. And as I speak to you, by the end of calendar year 23, maybe in 3 months from now, we would have transited in every port of ours to go in the container transportation, horizontal transportation into entire electric ITVs. What does it give to, and what does the opportunity for the energy transition bring in? It also brings in something that India is standing on. From a net importer of fossil fuels, we are in an exciting phase to see that if you can have a hydrogen economy, a green hydrogen at that, ammonia economy, and incidentally, the largest users of this, madam, it will be very happy for you to note, is the shipping sector. It is the ships of the world which are the guzzlers of bad fuel. So all the dirty fuel can be replaced, and when it happens, Indian coastal economic zones, right along 7,517 kilometers. I always grew up as a child reading the beautiful book of Niraj Chaudhary, A Million Mutinies. I think today, 1.4 billion dreams are waiting to encapture themselves in this kind of thing. I'll leave you with this thought, Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. That was rather impressive. I think we have another speaker, right? Okay, he's not going to speak. All right. So then we then, then we have some time. I think rather than going to these issues, one particular issue that we are discussing is that ports may not be just the ports that we are talking about. The land around the ports, which means port-led industrialization. We are also talking about these MMLPs that are coming up, multimodal logistics parks, that is, which basically means that Bharat Pravah that today we are talking about, we started with the theme that how this sector goes more to the people, how it is understood by population at large. So one big opportunity there is that these ports, when they talk about more industrialization, JNPA has started its own SCZ, which is a good, again, a good successful example of a government entity getting into this, where there's an immense response on this, where not only does it lead to the reduction in logistics cost, but it also creates a completely new ecosystem. And again, the not just the population around there, which gets into some kind of employment there, but also leads to a much better way of dealing with this whole cycle. So the cost and time equation that we keep talking about, this is one big example. We also got into what is commonly now being called as dry ports. So we started with the concept of dry ports, which are now converted into MMLPs, converted because we got into tie-ups with the Ministry of Road Transport, because we had prepared the infrastructure where the railway linkage was being provided. If some of you understand Maharashtra, then there is a region of Vidarbha and there's a region of Marathwada. So we picked up two places there, where in Wardha, which is near Nagpur, and Jalna, which is near Aurangabad, which has its own industrial presence. We've created these dry ports. Basically, what they mean, it's like an ICD plus, but then the kind of railway linkage we provided, the Ministry of Roads in turn now provides the road linkage, which means there's a multimodal connectivity. I think what I want to go with one round on the theme of on where we started from. Where do you think in future, because it may be so easy to say that let's start the advocacy of this sector, but where do you think is the scope to get in the imagination, to get them into the conversation and consciousness, so to say, people at large of this sector? Sanjam, why don't you come in and see, let's say future means 5 to 10 years from now, how would we see there would be more involvement of people in general, or how would this sector can, reach the imagination of people in general?
So I think that one is that we, as somebody mentioned, that we're like a B2B, right? We are not reaching out to the consumers. I think what we can refer to, we don't have to reinvent the wheel. We can refer to what Maritime UK has done. And if you see what Maritime UK does, is that it actually runs campaigns to reach out to the people directly on, photography competitions, essay competitions, things like that. But also it also offers, what do you say, can't get the right word. They offer the maritime industry with, I'm so sorry, I can't get the right word right now. Yeah. So they offer the maritime industry with a support system. So the maritime industry is actually reaching out to the general public and telling them that 90% of everything is moving by sea. And it's actually a campaign done by the entire industry together. So today, if we notice, we have various associations in India in shipping, right? You have AMTOY, you have Triple FAI, you have MANSA, you have so many different associations. You have IPTA, the Port Association. So what I think is that we all need to stop working in silos, and there has to be a general overall body or an overall a mission made where we work together to educate the public, because otherwise I see that every association is doing their own little bit, and that's again working in silos. It's not solving the problem. And don't mind me, I've been hearing this since the last 2 decades. When I entered the industry, I heard the same thing. We've been talking about it. How do the general public doesn't know about what we do? People ask me if I'm in shipping and they think that I sail on ships. They don't understand the concept that you can be on shore and you can actually work in maritime as well. So that education to the general public has to be done with everybody jointly, collectively.
I would welcome Mr. Sanjeev Ranjan, the Secretary Government of India has just entered. So would you like to join us on stage? Please come, sir. I think it's a, I don't know whether there's one more session, but that's only about the role of women. So I think please give him a big hand. Yeah, please come, sir. So in fact we were discussing the future of ports, and we discussed on the kind of infrastructure, the smart port bit, the sustainable port, but then we also were now talking about this topic where Bharat Pravah essentially means how people can come in more, how this sector can be in the psyche of the people. There are two things there. One is, at one level we are saying that there'll be more automation, more digitization. So in that sense, the direct port employment is going to be lesser, right? So what are those other areas where you think it can come in?
Thank you so much. First of all, greetings and regards to Secretary Shipping, sir. Chairman, sir, I was referring to, you have already given a cue as to how ports are evolving, let's say at JNPT, into a industrial zone. Let me tell you that at each of the ports, and especially cite the example of a very virtuous economic cycle that plays out at Mundra. So Mundra is 40 kilometers of waterfront. At any best imagination, it can be a complex of 3 large complexes. Today we are developing a container complex with about 6 container terminals having a capacity of more than about close to 25 million TEUs in times to come. So I think we will play a part in being the mega ports that you are looking at. But more importantly, the industrial aspiration of India and the way it can sit with the coastal community. So here we have a port and the world's largest coal import terminal, leading to 2 ultra mega power plants on behalf of Tata Power, CGPL, and the Adani Power. And of late, when you talk about a lack of employment and people migrating into new jobs, see, we have to welcome change into migrating into new jobs, and these jobs have to come through a power of digitalization. Somehow, I am extremely optimistic about the digital journey that India will do, because I'm aware of the aspiration of a normal Indian. He may or may not get to go to a school. Give him a smartphone, he can do a text. You know, today the largest users of the smartphone and digitalization post-COVID is not us who sit in very cool or warm rooms, as the case may be with the weather, but it is those unseen, unknown, unheard workers who have been touched by the direct cash transfer and who have the ability to convert a small ride, a small Uber, a small total, including the person comes to your house. This is the power of digitalization. When these workers digitally empower themselves, they will get to the new jobs. And what are they? The transition of energy that is happening in India, India's relevance, solar. You'll be proud to know that the solar panel manufacturing and the other accessories related to that, if you want to see state of the art, you just have to visit Mundra, which incidentally I've requested you always. And if you come and see, you'll feel proud. The other day, we had some guests from a first world country, I'll not name them, very large investors of a size who can compete with the Canadian pension funds, etc. And they said, look, for a moment we thought we weren't in India. And we clarified to them, look, this is the new India. You better get accustomed to what new India is looking and will look in the future. And all the people that you see here, they come from the adjoining villages through CSR initiatives and through the outreach programs. So that is the digital transformation and the transformation of the economic employment that will happen. I'm, for one, not at all worried that RTGs will give way to remote RMGs, because these are the people who will then come to these new jobs. and all the RE transition, the renewable power transmission that is happening, and I'm not even talking about the hydrogen economy. Today, some of the best promoters, largest capital gainers in the country today, I don't name them, are putting their money and their word into seeing that India will be at the forefront of this energy transition. When it happens, I am only hoping, I'm sure my lifetime is around to see that we will be having hydrogen-powered vessels sailing out from India, and that will be the transition that we're looking at. Thank you.
All right, great. I think what we are also trying to say is that these so-called new employment opportunities, I mean, whether they'll require some reskilling for the current ones or what are those opportunities for the rest of the population which is looking at this sector, is what we will have to identify and then bring it to the imagination, the consciousness of people. Sir, can we come to you now? So basically, we have tried to discuss the various parts of future of ports and shipping industry. Since you head this department, let us know and understand from you, and for both ports and shipping, if there were to be 2 or 3 things which we look forward to for future of ports and shipping in India specifically, sir, with the global trends, what would they be, sir? Over to you, sir.
Thank you, Sanjay. Okay, with Mr. Sanjay Sethi, who heads JNPT, and from Adani Ports, you heard the kind of future projections in terms of having hydrogen-powered ships coming into being, and the other distinguished speakers who are there on the stage. I'm sure you have had a good idea of what the future lies. I think with our growth and the entire economy, the way we look at it, we had prepared the vision for the Maritime India Vision 2030. Now, with the changes which have taken place now in the process of having the Amrit Kal Vision 2047 being prepared, which does capture some of the vision which the 2 speakers right now try to put in. So the larger picture is indeed, we are going to be at the forefront as far as the maritime sector is concerned. The previous session, which I understand was on the maritime history, and now we're talking of the future. So the glorious history starting from Lothal to what was just mentioned to you, I think it's time that we recaptured, redeemed what our glorious maritime tradition was. And with the kind of growth that we are into, the kind of population dividend that we have, I think we are all set to be able to reach there. And therefore, the vision that we have for 2030 does think of having mega ports, not one, but multiple ones, both on the East Coast and the West Coast. For Mundra and for JNPT, we just heard the kind of digitization that would happen, which would make things seamless, paperless, faceless. And there again, we have a distinct advantage. Quite a bit of it is already happening. The Mundra story you heard, where the first world country people come and tell us where we are. I think that's the way the other ports are going to be. The newer challenge is to be the green, and the decarbonization is another big thing which is happening, on which again our ports are substantially geared up. And again, I think there's an area in which we can become world leaders. And talking of the ports, you have had the eminent speaker talking to you about it. On the shipping side, the green initiative being early starters, it could be a big advantage for us. And we are talking of smaller vessels, tugs, the coastal vessels. We creating a niche for ourselves that we become suppliers for green vessels for the world, be it battery powered, be it EV vessels, for which we already made a head start, be it ammonia and hydrogen powered, and be it hydrogen fuel cell, for which some of our companies are already working. And the future of shipping is going to be distinctly different from what it is in terms of the fuel they use, as you just mentioned, in terms of the size of vessels and the ports that are required to be able to handle that. Now, for that, again, we have the plan for developing mega ports, along with that, transshipment hubs, some of on our shore, on the mainland itself. We already have Cochin, which has made a head start. We got to get bigger on the world map as far as Cochin is concerned. We have Vizhinjam happening on the southernmost tip. We have a mega port planned at Galathea Bay, which is along the 6-degree channel, where the biggest of the ships, which transit through Malacca coast, virtually touch that point. And the idea is that with Galathea Bay being able to take vessels which require draft of 18, 20, 22 meters, we should be able to have a hub which is, serves the ports all along the Bay of Bengal, which includes all the coasts, all the ports on our shore, as well as the one in Bangladesh, Indonesia, Malaysia, and Thailand. And on the port side, the transshipment side, the green initiative, the digitization initiative, and alongside our footprint, the maritime footprint, also has to expand, starting from the Galathea Bay initiative, which I mentioned, where we service not just our ports, but also sub-ports in our neighborhood. We would like the influence of our maritime sector going beyond, and we have things happening, for example, in Sitwe in Myanmar. We have initiatives happening on Chabahar so that we are able to get over the recent problem we have had in terms of getting access to some of the Baltic states and the Central Asian republics. So that's another big thing which is happening, and we as become bigger and with the kind of technological advantage and size that we're able to reach, we have initiatives which are already happening, and I'm sure would give new opportunities to our people in terms of employment. The maritime sector today, for example, we have about 2 lakh odd seafarers. We have a substantially larger number of people already trained, waiting to be able to man the vessels for countries across the world. And with these new things happening, and our youngsters being well equipped both in terms of skills and abilities, should be able to get a bigger role to play. We right now have a 12% kind of a contribution to the world seafarer community. And with the distinct population dividend that we have and the kind of developments that are taking place, maybe there are newer opportunities which are going to be available to our youth. And that's another big sector on the maritime side that we need to be looking at, build on that. And with that, we'll be able to involve everyone. So as I see it, with stalwarts of the industry sitting here, and the involvement of the people and the events like this will be able to enthuse them to be able to come forward in this. And the next session, I understand, is on women in the maritime sector. That's another big future which I see. The legal framework, the other initiatives which was required from the DG shipping side has already been made. And we have had vessels which are fully manned by women. And with more women coming on board, I'm sure they could be contributing to a much larger measure on the maritime side. So one segment of the population which was rather underrepresented, now with their energy also coming on board, we would be fully prepared and fully geared up to be able to meet the challenge of the world as it evolves. And I wish this event my best wishes, and with the kind of enthusiasm and the support that we'll be able to build up with this, we should be able to reach what we are aspiring for. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir. I think the timekeeper tells me that we should wind up. Okay, I think I thank all the co-panelists and all the members of the audience. We've had a fruitful discussion, and I hope we can consolidate this and so that we can document it in a good manner. Thank you very much.
thank you to all the panelists for highlighting all the developments that the future can have in the ports and shipping in India, and also providing an all-round perspective on the table today. We are privileged to have Shri Sanjeev Ranjan among us, and I would request him to kindly be seated here only, as we are beginning with our next session immediately. I also request Ms. Sanjam Sahi Gupta to be also seated on the stage itself. So our last but not the very least session of the day is about to begin. Its title is Women in the Maritime, Facts and Future. The panelists will be Shri Sanjeev Ranjan, Captain Tushar Pradhan, Ms. Sumit Sharma, and Ms. Sanjam Sahi Gupta. I request Captain Tushar Pradhan and Ms. Sumit Sharma to kindly come on